All right. I'd like to thank you for coming and listening to this class today. I call it the quick version of the class. We were learning a lot about these webinar companies. They're really busy on Saturdays, and sometimes, everybody's busy here, and everybody's doing a webinar, and the next thing you know, we're having a lot of problems with the server. So we're going to redo this class, like we've had to redo the last three, I believe. And today's class, we're going to be talking about emptiness and the emergence of the Mahayana. Now, all right, welcome to today's class. This is the fourth session, and some of you caught the simulcast, and others are just hearing this now. We're learning a lot about how webinars run, and we found out that doing them on Saturday, we've got to be really careful of where we work because things get okay. I'd like to thank you all for listening. We did the class on the simulcast, and it was a very abbreviated class because there was too many people on the server, and they were cutting everybody's time. So we're new at some of these things, and we think we finally got this all under control. And today we're going to be talking about emptiness and the emergence of the Mahayana. This is the fourth session that we had, and we're going to go backwards on this a bit. We're going to speak about the Mahayana first. So that is going to kind of be a nice little segue into emptiness. There are things called councils, and the elders of different sects and traditions get together, and they don't happen very often. The first one happened shortly after the Buddha passed into paranirvana. And the second one is this council that met 100 years after the Buddha passed. This picture that you're seeing now is actually the last council that was had was in 1956, and basically only Theravada Buddhists were at that council because things have changed a great deal, which we're going to talk about today. This second council, this is when there started to become a schism. The Theravada school is very focused on monastics, and they don't have much to do, honestly, with laity. Now that's changed a little bit, but during this time, the only thing that people were, doing for Buddhism at that time was they were doing what was called merit making. They were doing, cooking, doing what have you for the monastic sangha, and they would get what was called merit making. By doing that, they could hope to be born, into a better lifetime next time. The only people that Theravada Buddhists really taught were each other, and it was strictly monastic school. Now, Mahayana, it wasn't called Mahayana quite yet, but there was a growing group of people that thought that the Theravada was becoming entirely too elitist. And they also thought that, from some of them, some people didn't get, we're going to talk in a second, some people got a few different teachings from the Buddha than everybody else got. And, they also understood that, Dharma is not, nothing is permanent, but neither can Dharma. If nothing's permanent, how can Dharma be permanent? It's got to evolve and grow too. And what is really interesting to do and helps make this, understand this a bit is, how the Buddha taught. The Buddha did teach the Mahayana. There's no doubt about it. But the Buddha said, there are more teachings than leaves in the forest. I will only be able to share a few with you. So what the Buddha is saying is that there's a lot of teachings, that some of these teachings and Buddha also said that he would intentionally teach some very contradictory things. People that are Mahayana Buddhists, they believe that Buddha taught them differently than what he taught Theravada. And the Vajrayana, they believe that they got a different set of teachings from Buddha too. And the Buddha also said that, there would become a time when new teachings would develop, and that a lot of his work was going to be clarified by other teachers. You got to understand, Buddha was only here 80 years, and he was only teaching probably 50 of those years. Well, that's a long time, but if he's saying that there's, more teachings than leaves in the forest, 80 years is not long. And again, this new group believed that the Buddha would have wanted the Dharma to evolve, and nothing is permanent. But, even though we've got this schism in kind of brewing here, for the most part, Buddhist groups get along. We might have some different views on emptiness, and we're going to talk in a few minutes about what our differences might be, but we don't, we don't say anything is wrong. And Mahayana can't really say that Theravada is necessarily wrong, because their teachings are based on, the core of their teaching is the Pali and the Mahayana tradition. Now, a very, very, very important figure in Mahayana Buddhism, in all of Buddhism, he comes into the picture around this time, and he's called Nagarjuna. And he is, they believe, he wasn't just believe, he was the second Buddha. And he pretty much is the one responsible for the Mahayana coming into existence. And there's a few things that were very crucial that Nagarjuna wanted to make sure people knew. First of all, he clarified emptiness, as the idea of no self, which is crucial to the Mahayana. But, what he also taught is that nothing has inherent existence. So it's not just the self that is empty, but everything is empty. We should have put that in the bit there. The other real important concept that Nagarjuna wanted to hammer home was there's a thing called relative truth. And that's, common sense. People see me, they say that, there's a guy or there's sky. And that is, relative truth. That is common sense. That's what you've been taught, and that's, you see this body. So that's, and you know who I am, so that's God. But what Nagarjuna said is that ultimate truth is everything is empty of inherent existence. Thus, what you see as relative truth is nothing but an obscuration. It's nothing but an illusion. And that's where sometimes people get, well, Buddhists say we don't exist. No. But how we think, we will talk about that today too. How we think we exist is not correct. We do exist, though. And Nagarjuna was the first to really talk about this ultimate truth. And this was pretty radical for the time. And also, Nagarjuna, he served as the head of the Nalanda University, which is our namesake. The Nalanda University was it was the greatest Buddhist college or institution that's ever existed. People from all over, every sect tradition from countries far and wide, they came to share, they teach, learn. They also did a lot of social work for the community that was around the university. It was wonderful. And they're starting, from what I understand, to do some excavation. And there are some people that are hoping that another Nalanda might come into existence someday. So let's look for a minute here where there are differences between Theravada and Mahayana. When I talked with you about the Theravada school, I told you that everything, that is the foundation. That is the foundation of what, this Mahayana and Vajrayana. They're all, it's based, the Theravada is the foundation. The differences are the ideal, what you can strive to become. The Theravada is the arhat. We talked about that in the first class, that you become enlightened, basically just for yourself. And the Theravada tradition believes that you basically have to be monastic, and that it's going to take many, many lifetimes. Don't get in a hurry. The Mahayana, the ideal is the Bodhisattva, and that is, for now, we're going to talk about that later, but now that is a person that becomes enlightened but does not go into nirvana until all sentient beings are enlightened and can go into nirvana. That's the basic idea of Bodhisattva. Now the literature, that's a little different too. We talked about Pali Canon, and Pali Canon is, the complete teachings of what Buddha talked about when he was alive. Not necessarily these extra, not necessarily so much Mahayana or Vajrayana, but there's things in there that talk about different types of teachings. But the Pali Canon is, what the Buddha said. And it's interesting that the Pali Canon wasn't written until, I believe, 600 years or more than that, after Buddha died. People would memorize from generation to generation sutras. And nobody thought to write it down. Finally they decided to, and that's the Pali Canon. The Mahayana, they've got the Pali Canon, but they have some additional teachings on top of it. And politics, the Theravada is conservative and Mahayana is liberal. And don't think of conservative liberal like like politics here. It's not necessarily that way. They are conservative. We talked down below, they really want you to pay attention to rules in education. That's the big thing. They don't want, you don't go straying around in Theravada Buddhism. It's very straightforward. It's very set. You know that this is what's expected, and that's what you're going to do. Whereas the Mahayana, intuition and practice, you might have an intuition that helps you understand or, guide you to one of the different Mahayana schools. And once you get there, their ideal is that you practice. What practice means, people say, well, what is your practice? Your practice is you're practicing for how you want to be outside. What you take and you do your practice, it's like practicing how you want to live life. So that's the concept of practice. Now the teaching, there's a this is a biggie. The Theravada teaches that there's no such thing as Buddha nature. And Mahayana, Buddha nature plays a very, very intricate and very important role. What Buddha nature is that every sentient being is told that they have the potential to become a Buddha. And every sentient being has this Buddha nature. It's kind of, I think, a nice way to look at it. It's like this, seed that's planted in every sentient being that helps them, I think a good way of putting it is that it kind of guides them to Dharma. It might take lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, but you have that Buddha nature. The Buddha taught that all beings were, they might be inherently empty, but all beings were also inherently good. That you might be really bad and really rotten in one lifetime, but one lifetime when you're talking about thousands, kind of all I think comes out in the wash. Now when we talk about emptiness, Nagarjuna was one that helped us understand that it's not just the self. That's the Theravada view. The Theravada view is you are the only thing that's empty. And the Mahayana teaches that everything is empty of inherent existence. And, to me, my way of thinking is that, if the self is empty, I don't quite understand how anything else can't be empty. But that's just, how I view things. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is how both traditions how they view the Buddha. The view of the Theravada was Buddha was a very bright guy that figured out enlightenment, and that's why he is the Buddha. Other people have become enlightened, but they didn't do it themselves, so, you're Buddha. You're an enlightened being. You're not the Buddha. But the Mahayana, they believe that the Buddha, it was the teacher of gods and men. And they believe that before, and this is a little bit in Mahayana, very, very prevalent in Vajrayana and Tantric Buddhism, that the Buddha before he came, and in this last incarnation as Sakyamuni Buddha, he taught gods. He was in the heavens, different realms of existence, teaching gods, and then he taught man too. So that's, a very, very big difference about how the Buddha is viewed. Through there. Excuse me for whipping through that a little fast. We just about lost a slide. Okay, so what is the Bodhisattva? A bodhisattva is anyone motivated by great compassion, has generated bodhicitta, which is a spontaneous wish to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings, and you can take the vow of the bodhisattva. That's not, just because you're a Mahayana Buddhist does not make you, bodhisattva. You have to take the vow of the bodhisattva. And it's you have to have refuge first, and you can take bodhisattva vow. And, it's something that I think people should really think about. Sometimes people just like willy-nilly, they're going to, they want to sign up for every empowerment they can have, and they want to, take every vow, tantric vow, this vow, that vow, and they really need to look at what they're taking a vow of. And bodhisattva is fairly, this is a pretty big deal. You will become enlightened, or you will, or you refrain from entering nirvana until all other sentient beings can too. And when you talk about sentient beings, we're talking about every, animal, insect, things seen, unseen. And, I'm not trying to scare people off by taking bodhisattva vows. If you start to understand and get a reference of, Buddhist cosmology, it doesn't matter what the number is. It doesn't matter. But, some people are going to say, I don't think I want to wait for everybody. I'm a little bit more concerned about myself. And some people eventually, if they start practicing Mahayana or Tantric Buddhism, then it becomes more of an understanding of why they would want to do it. There's 10 levels of bodhisattva, from a very rough course all the way to the level of bodhisattva has Ivaltagiri, Shivara, Manjushri, the Terras, Vajrayana, several other deities. They are not Buddhas. They're bodhisattvas. They're aspects of the Buddha. And it's important to realize that bodhisattvas don't always, aren't always Buddhists. That guy on the corner begging change, he might be a bodhisattva that's giving you a wonderful opportunity to practice compassion. You never know. I think that, and it's part of the teaching of the 8 verses of training the mind that the Sutra of Dalai Lama is always telling people to. It's a very, very good reference for bodhisattva. But, it really helps you understand that you don't necessarily know. This might be relative. That guy in the corner, that might be relative truth. He's the guy in the corner. But the ultimate truth, he's empty of inherited existence, and he could be a bodhisattva. Who knows? His Holiness the Dalai Lama believes Mother Teresa was a bodhisattva, and the general consensus is Martin Luther King and Gandhi were both bodhisattvas. Basically, the reason is because they both really, really honed and defined at that time in history nonviolence, especially while them and theirs are being violently oppressed at the time. So, what do you do when you're a bodhisattva? Taking the vow. A good thing to do is to generate bodhicitta, and that's the enlightened mind for the benefit. It's helping you become enlightened, your mind becoming an enlightened mind, thus you will be able to help people more. See, when you are taking bodhisattva vow and you are practicing bodhisattva, you're wanting to really open up that compassion and kindness to all beings. And the 4 immeasurables, it's a very good start. You practice being loving and kind and compassionate, joy in the good fortune of others. My teacher here, Nichren Rinpoche, he really helped me. And he just told me one time, it was during commentary on Shinrenzing practice, that how important to rejoice in the good fortune of others. And that's similar to a Mahayana. It's Mahayana to the core because, you're happy. You're becoming part of the happiness and the good fortune of others. And when you are very altruistic about it, you get a great deal of merit and benefit by being, joyous in the good fortune of others, especially if it's somebody you don't necessarily care for. Part of what this whole thing, and when we talk about emptiness, it comes into play, in a better way of understanding that, we have to treat these people that we don't necessarily like, the same way as we treat, our teacher. I've said before, I need to treat Sarah Palin how I would treat Holiness Dalai Lama. I'm far from that. But, it's something I realize. But you practice the four immeasurables. And the six paramitas, or the six perfections, sometimes they're called paramitas, sometimes they're called perfection. It's concentration, which is meditation. Giving, morality, patience, persistent wisdom. Let's go back to morality, because that word makes the hair on some people's necks stand up, especially people in the LGBT community, because we've been accused of being morally degenerate. That's not what this is about. This is the morality of how you live your life. It's not about your sexuality. It's how you live your life and the principles that help guide your life. And morality, you set your own tone for morality. And like I've said before, sometimes as your practice changes, your view of morality is going to change a little bit too. Now, this isn't, a major part of the picture, but I've been asked about it a few times, about deities, especially because Tantric Buddhists, deities are a big thing. And they're not that big of a deal in the Theravada, and they are to a degree in certain Mahayana traditions. We'll talk about that. But the Theravada, the majority of their deities are Hindu deities. That really surprised me. With the exception of Kuan Yin, who is Avalokiteshvara. Now, we talk about the Mahayana. Let's go back to this Kuan Yin, because this is confusing for some people. The Bodhisattva of love and compassion was taught in Buddhism in India. He's Avalokiteshvara. He is a man. He's seen with 2 arms, 4 arms, or 1,000 arms. But these deities, they can manifest in different forms in different places, and in many countries and in many traditions, Avalokiteshvara has manifested as Kuan Yin, a female, who we're going to have a class about Kuan Yin and Avalokiteshvara. And Avalokiteshvara is called Shinrensing in Tibetan Buddhism. But they're all basically the same. They're just different manifestations. Avalokiteshvara and Shinrensing are the exact same thing. Kuan Yin is a different manifestation. Same deity, different manifestation. The deity, Avalokiteshvara, is trying to, impart love and compassion and mercy and benefit to everybody. And sometimes, in certain situations, it's probably better that Avalokiteshvara is Kuan Yin. Now, the Mahayana, with an exception, we'll talk about that with Pure Land, but Mahayana Buddhism, there's basically a trinity. It's Buddha Sakyamuni, the last Buddha, Maitreya, that is the next Buddha. We know who the next Buddha is going to be. And the sutras, it's very interesting what they say. Sometime we might be able to have a little discussion about that. People are going to be very different sized when Maitreya comes. And the other trinity is the Avalokiteshvara. So those are the major deities of Mahayana Buddhism. They don't have practices per se involving the different deities as Tantric Vajrayana Buddhism do, but they do play a role. So now let's look at some of the more well-known sects traditions. And it gets kind of confusing because some things you say sects, school, tradition. The basic thing is the Mahayana, I think it's better to look at it as a branch. There's branches. There's 3 branches. There's Mahayana, Vajrayana, and we don't say Hinayana anymore, the Theravada school. And then you've got these different traditions, and these traditions can have, subsects. But anyway, in China it's called Chan. In the United States and Japan it's called Zen. In Korea it's called Xion. And in Vietnamese it's called Tien. But it's basically what we call Zen Buddhism. It was founded in China in the 6th century by a guy that came from India named Bodhidharma. And there's a little picture of Bodhidharma here. And I've never seen a picture of that guy looking happy. I don't think, I know he had a great deal of compassion. There's no doubt about that. But he always has that look on his face, But very compassionate being. But what he called it, again, was wall gazing. And because what he was basically doing is getting people ready to learn how to sit. Zazen is what some of the Japanese call it. But you're going to do a lot of meditation for self-realization and emptiness. You know, some people have talked to me about, you know, going and getting hit with sticks with some of these. You know, it's very, very rigid on, you know, certain schools. It sounds somewhat like Theravada, very rigid, but yeah, it is. It can be very, very rigid. And the thing that's interesting is that it emphasizes the mere knowledge of the sutra and favors direct understanding through meditation. You know, and I think that it's interesting because one of our regulars that I've grown to have a great deal of affection for, she is a Korean Buddhist, and she, you know, she can do the chants and the liturgy, and she has no idea what it means. It's done in Korean, and they do not really want people to understand Korean. And this is part of what they're trying to do, is that you get this, you know, through meditation and direct understanding. And, you know, when we get down to a little bit, it's because I think that if you are going to practice this, one of the best things I've heard said, and I believe it to be completely true, is the best thing you could do is forget everything you know. You know, you're going to understand that people are not what they appear to be, reality isn't what it appears to be, and the sooner you can forget everything you've ever known, the closer you can come to some sort of realization. But that's, you know, it interested me that some schools, they don't, you know, it's done in a different language, and it's done in a different language for, you know, a reason. You don't let your ego grasp onto it because you don't know what it is. You get this full benefit. You know, the Tibetan practices, for a long time, they were only in Tibetan. There was not any English translations. Now there are. But, you know, these languages, like Tibetan and Sanskrit, they were designed for Dharma. That doesn't mean, you know, the only thing I will tell you is that English is not very good at all for Dharma. But what they do, and, you know, I said that they want you to forget everything you've ever known. They want you to strive for true reality, not the one that you've created by your rational, intellectual, fear, ego, or preconceived notion. You know, all of that is not true. And part of where that starts, they really hone in, is that you focus on the here and now. You are present. You are in the moment. You're not concerned about past or future. You're just here. And so, you know, that's part of what their meditational practice is just being present. One of the more fascinating things about Zen Chan, whatever, is that they poems. And what they are their sayings or questions that you know, your relative mind is not going to be able to quite comprehend. And one of the most common of these is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And think about that for a second. You know, what would the sound be of one hand clapping? Is there any sound of one hand clapping? You know, they have many of these types of sayings, and, you know, to me, there's a beauty and an elegance to some of them, even though they might seem a bit coarse. I found that to be, the more I've read about different poems, the more fascinated I've been. One of the great teachers of Zen Buddhism, Shunryu Suzuki, his most famous quote is, "Beginners' minds are the best. They have no preconceived notions." It goes a bit to what I was saying about if you can forget everything you know. But, you know, if you just jump into this, it's kind of like, you know, you throw the kid in the deep end of the pool, and by some way it swims. You know, sometimes it is the best thing you can do. You know, it's just jump into, you know, your practice and work with your guru or teacher, and, you know, cultivate what they help think is going to be best for you. You know, both the Mahayana and the Vajrayana, they talk a great deal in their additional sutras about devotion to the teacher, devotion to the guru. And, you know, jump in, find the guru, and do what they want you to do. You know, it was one mistake I made, is to try to think, you know, I need to go and I'll, you know, put my own little practices together. And it worked for a while, but it was, you know, that was my disposition. And some of that's, you know, definitely changed. So that is the Chan, Zin, Shon, and Tian. The next school we're going to talk about is Nichiren. This is a it's one of the most unique, if not the most. It's one of, or if not the most unique of traditions, schools that you are going to ever find. We know a little bit about that through this. We probably know anybody that knows the mantra of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. But Nichiren was a monk, and he didn't quite like what he was hearing. He believed that he could find an ultimate teaching, and he went away for what I understand was 10 years. And he came to the conclusion that and this is the key, the only sutra, the only thing that will lead to your salvation or your enlightenment is the Lotus Sutra. Now the Lotus Sutra is a bit complicated, and there's many different translations of it. The Nichiren school they follow a very distinct translation of Lotus Sutra. A lot of traditions, they don't even bother with the Lotus Sutra. There's very few Tibetan traditions and other Mahayana editions that even really fool much with the Lotus Sutra. It's not to say that it's bad or wrong. Nichiren believes that this is every other teaching that the Buddha taught was in preparation for this final one. It's like you did all of this work, and then, it comes to the conclusion, you don't even need to remember all of it. All you need to remember is the Lotus Sutra, and to chant the name of the Lotus Sutra. Now, Nichiren believed he was a Bodhisattva that came here to spread the Lotus Sutra in Japan. And like I said, all you need to really do is chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. They don't talk about Buddha. They don't talk about Four Noble Truths. They don't talk about anything except a few pages of liturgy of the Lotus Sutra and to chant the Lotus Sutra. Theravada schools, they're telling you, don't be thinking you're going to get enlightened anytime soon. Where the Mahayana, it can be a little bit. And, the Nichiren is, I think, the only Mahayana that pretty much guarantees you can become enlightened in one lifetime. And I don't understand all of it. I will be honest with you. The first flirtation I had with Buddhism was Nichiren, and I want to, though, I'm not wanting to badmouth or say anything negative, but I'm a very inquisitive person, and I wanted to know more about Buddha, and I was also running around wild in the entertainment industry, so it was not going to be much of a practice at that time anyway. But, I will admit that was the first taste I had, but I wanted much, much more. The thing about Nichiren that I find to be interesting is that he was amazingly critical of other schools, especially Zen. He had it in for Zen for some reason, and obviously I don't know why, but he really, and I think a lot of the practitioners today that I've run across, they really don't have much. They don't even necessarily say something, but they just, I know one of them told a friend of mine that, Tantric Buddhism is never going to do anything for you. But Nichiren was so critical of other schools that I know there was at least one, and somebody told me there's 2 or 3 assassination attempts. And he caused so much ruckus about his dead-on view that it was Lotus Sutra and you shouldn't do anything else and the rest of them are not good, that he was forced into exile twice. Now, there's many, many subsects, but the 3 major sects of Nichiren Buddhism is Nichiren Shu, Nichiren Soshu, and Sokogake. Now, the Sokogake is what you probably, if you have friends that are Nichiren Buddhists, they're probably a member of Sokogake, and there was some sort of schism, not unlike Mahayana and Theravada, but the Sokogake decided that they were not going to have laity. It's my understanding that they get together and they've got like a neighborhood leader, which it's probably quite an interesting thing. I mean, it's like I said, I don't badmouth any sect. It's one of the most unique sects. Nichiren Daishonin that he started. But again, their whole practice is Namihorenge Kyo, which translates into Salutation to the Lotus Sutra. Now, the next school is Pure Land, and in some ways it can be a little bit reminiscent of Nichiren Buddhism, because they're, it's very clear what they teach and what they practice. But what's also interesting is that the concept of Amitabha, who we'll talk about, he's the major deity in Pure Land Buddhism. The concept of Amitabha Buddha and Pure Land, or it's sometimes in like the Tibetan tradition, it's called Deshwan. But the concept of Amitabha and Pure Land, or Deshwan, is weaved through many other different schools. But the Pure Land in and of itself, it centers around Buddha Amitabha. Now, he is one of the 5 Dhyani Buddhists. It's kind of like the 5 Buddha families. And we'll get into the other 4 at some other point in time. But Amitabha also has a very, very strong connection with Chinren Gatagiri Shivara. What their school is focused on or believes is that nirvana is no longer attainable here. That you can't, really count on ever getting to nirvana here. But they believe that if you focus to devotion on Amitabha, you will be reborn in the Pure Land, which is a very kind of like very good place. You can do, if you're in Pure Land, you can still do Bodhisattva work, but you're doing it from a different dimension. Let's say some people think of it as some form of Buddhist heaven. I think you should think of it more as just a different mindset or state of mind. But when you're in the Pure Land, all negative karma disappears, then nirvana is possible. So when they say nirvana is no longer attainable here, they're not saying that it is, impossible to, hit nirvana some other time. Their major practice is chanting Namyo Amida Butsuha, and it's showing that devotion. They are talking a lot about devotion to Amitabha. When you start looking more at a lot of Mahayana Buddhists and Tantric Buddhism especially, there is a great deal of devotion to the deities, devotion to Buddha Sakyamuni, devotion to Amitabha. That's a big, big thing. And interestingly, Amitabha in this tradition is flanked by Kuan Yin and another bodhisattva named Mahasattvapada. I have a difficult time pronouncing that, never have been very good with it. Those are, the 3 principal deities that the Pure Land, that's the ones that they really practice. Like I said just a few minutes ago, that many of these sects and traditions, they do have some sort of Pure Land and Amitabha and weave throughout their tradition too. Now we're going to talk about emptiness. And the reason we went kind of backwards is there's a few aspects that, if you understand, especially like what Nagarjuna was talking about, is going to make this a little bit more palatable. And this was the second turning of the Wheel of the Dharma. It's not, emptiness is what we call it, it's called sunyata. And the Buddha taught, as a matter of fact, that little drawing that you see, that's exactly where the Buddha taught emptiness. There's something that happens when people start to practice Dharma. And then I find that when you start to get a little bit of devotion, you realize that there's a lot of things involved in Buddhism that you can't put words, words just don't describe. When they're talking about being in the moment, what being in the moment can necessarily be. If you can't think of anything future or past, you're just in the moment. How do you describe that? And the same thing is true of emptiness. This is a great example. When you have these things like emptiness or truly being in the moment, you don't have words that can describe them, but you can tell people what it's not. And unfortunately, that's where some people have gotten this idea that Buddhism is nihilistic in some way. Buddhism is the furthest thing from nihilism. But it's easier if we can tell you. If we don't know exactly what it is, We sense it. It's something we sense or we feel, but we can't put the word. We don't, it doesn't make sense. And by the way, English is the worst language for Dharma. It's, the Tibetan tradition, it was geared, and part of the Sanskrit tradition was geared for religious reasons. So we know sometimes what something is not. And in this case, once again, emptiness is not nothingness. It doesn't mean that nothing exists at all. That would be the nihilistic view. We're going to be talking a little bit further in a few minutes about the self. Well, the Buddha says you don't exist. No, Buddha never said you don't exist. Buddha said what you think you are doesn't exist, but you do. You do exist. And that's, the nihilist try to say, well, Buddha doesn't believe that anything's real. Well, no. Buddha tells you what is really real, and what you think is real isn't. And the other thing is, emptiness is not some kind of heaven or separate realm apart from this world or its woes. It's not, all of this stuff is a state of mind. Nirvana and samsara, it's just a state of mind. That's the difference. And, while we can say that sounds so simplistic, that's part of what, you can't really describe. It's the truth, but the thing in between, you could ramble on about that or, ponder it. And some people have. I mean, that's why you have all of these different sects and traditions. It's how some people have pondered and interpreted some things to be. Now, I find that if there's a couple of concepts that you can begin to understand, nobody is going to get out of this class today and understand emptiness, because it's, nobody except a guru is really designed to teach you specifically about emptiness. I'm giving you some pieces that you can put together and begin to have an understanding of emptiness. I don't think anybody is going to become instantly enlightened by listening to me. That's not going to happen. But, these are just some pieces that are very influential. And if you can understand these pieces, they help you, get that. It's kind of like foundation. We have, we talk about the foundation. This is a very good foundation to begin to explore emptiness. And it's dependent arising. Now, some people get it confused that interdependence is dependent arising. It's not. But if you have a concept and you understand interdependence, dependent arising becomes a little clearer. And Kalu Rinpoche, this is one of the best examples of dependent arising I've ever heard. And Kalu Rinpoche he was my guru's guru here in California. And, I've never seen anybody except the Dalai Lama and Kalu Rinpoche that can explain Dharma, in very little words, and it makes complete sense. It's right to the point. Kalu Rinpoche says, when you hear the sound of a bell, ask yourself, what makes the sound? Is it the body of the bell, the clapper, the hand that moves the bell to and fro, or the ears that hear the sound? None of these elements alone produce the sound. It results from the interaction of all these factors. All the elements are necessary for the sound of the bell to be perceived, and they are necessary, not in succession, but they are necessarily simultaneously. It's the most important part, simultaneously. This sound is an event whose existence depends on the interaction of those elements. When you completely understand dependent arising, you also understand emptiness, and that is freedom. So what Kalu Rinpoche is saying, and it's very clear there, is you have all these components. This is just some. There's probably a few more. But, you hear the sound of a bell. What is the bell itself? What's inside the bell? Who is ringing the bell? Is it producing it? All of these things are necessary. But see, what's different about interdependent and dependent rising is all of these things have to happen simultaneously. When the bell rings, you hear it at the very same time. Now, that's dependent rising. All these factors happen simultaneously. And if you take something of them out, then it doesn't work. You're not necessarily, take the clapper out, you're not going to hear the bell. Well, you might hear something, but all of these things have to happen simultaneously. And that's dependent rising. The next thing, but okay, if you understand dependent arising, everything happens simultaneously, and everything has to happen. It happens at once. You know, it's not different. You know, it's happening all at once. Now, when we talk about the true self, we talk about 5 aggregates. So, when you hear, you know, somebody say, you know, okay, this is the ultimate, the relative truth is the person you see in the mirror. You know, that's you. That's who you think you are. Well, Buddha said the ultimate truth is you are 5 aggregates that are all happening simultaneously. And you start out with form. And we're not going to talk about, because sometimes it's easier to talk about, you know, the form, something that you can see instead of just yourself, but then we'll put, you know, the human response in. But this is what you are. Form is the solid object, the color, or the sound that is interdependent with the other sandhakas. These are these other aggregates. For example, a hot stove. From form, then there comes feeling. Is the act of the sense organ contacting the object. The skin feels, the eye sees, the ear hears. For example, when the skin comes in contact with a hot stove, then after that happens, you immediately will have perception. And the first sensational awareness of the object. For example, the skin becomes hot when it touches the stove. The next is impulse. That is the conscious reaction to the object. We place our hand on a hot stove, and our impulse is to pull it away before we even think. Consciousness is the mental awareness of the object. One feels the heat on the hand and thinks, ouch. So now you can understand when we talk a lot about consciousness, the mental awareness of things, these other parts are just as important. You have to have the form, you have to have the feeling, you have to have the perception, and you have to have the impulse. And sometimes people get kind of caught up in one of these others. Some people are very impulsive. If you're very impulsive, you're not necessarily, sometimes it's going to take you, consciousness is there, but you're just not aware of it. You know, the perception, sometimes we like to perceive things. We have this type of awareness, and that, you know, leads to the impulse. Our perceptions aren't always going to be, if you were looking at this any other way, your perception is coming from your ego. If any of these are coming from your ego, none of them are going to make any sense. Because this is who you really are. You are 5 aggregates that are, you know, working and operating together. And it is, you know, that's kind of a stretch, but then, you know, a lot of things in Dharma can be, you think of a bit of a stretch, but it doesn't mean that, you know, you quit thinking, you know, look in the mirror or anything like that, but you understand that you are these 5 things, you know. It's better than saying you're blonde, you know. Your form, feeling, perception, impulse, and consciousness. And that leads us to the Heart Sutra. Now, I mentioned that Avalokiteshvara is going to be playing a big role here in this discussion. You know, Avalokiteshvara is the deity that is in Mahayana and is in Theravada, is very, very prevalent in Tibetan Buddhism. The first time I ever took a teaching from Siddhartha Lama was the Heart Sutra, and if you ever have the opportunity to hear online or take the teaching of the Heart Sutra by His Holiness, do it. I think part of it makes it so special is, you know, the Tantric Buddhists, we believe that Avalokiteshvara, in the Dalai Lama and Karmapa are both physical manifestations of Avalokiteshvara. So it's kind of like you're hearing it from the horse's mouth. Now, if you went and asked His Holiness, you know, are you Avalokiteshvara, he's going to shake his head and laugh at you. But, you know, it's the manifestation. Man is extremely humble about things like these. But the Heart Sutra, these are the main points of it. Avalokiteshvara is in deep meditation. And he has this realization of the fundamental emptiness of all phenomena. And he knows this as he discovers what the 5 aggregates of human existence are. So he understands this whole thing of what we just went through. He's got it. And he knows that that is what human existence is all about. And then Yogaltikivishvara explains that he talks about this emptiness. And one of the more fascinating things is he does talk a lot about other teachings, and the one that I always found to be somewhat interesting, he said the Four Noble Truths, they don't really exist. The Four Noble Truths as we know them are relative truth. Relative can also be called the conventional truth. They are the conventional truth and they are not applicable. They are statements about reality. They are not reality, they are statements about reality. They are not reality itself, and that they are therefore not applicable to the ultimate truth. That is, by definition, beyond comprehending. So Yogaltikivishvara is not going to tell you completely what emptiness is because he says it's beyond comprehension. When we talked about in this class before, or no, this last class, Atisha said, about karma, until you're totally enlightened, don't waste your time. You're never going to totally understand it. And what Yogaltikivishvara is saying here is that until enlightenment is reached, your complete understanding of emptiness is going to be, the best you can find is in meditation. That's the best you can find, or in some practice that you might be doing. But it's important to understand that what he's saying is that the Four Noble Truths, they apply they're conventional. They apply here. But in the ultimate picture, they're just statements about reality. And as Nagarjuna would say, that these statements, in the long run, they cloud what reality really is. They're what we work with. And when we get to the next sentence, it might make a little bit more sense. They're what we work with. But in the end, they are just, some form of a delusion, honestly. So, what do you about to give you Shivara? The big thing that comes out of it, and the most, you hear this more than anything else, and that is, which is form is empty. Okay, so let's just think about that. If everything is inherent, is inherent, everything is empty, everything is empty. It's an empty inherent existence. Well, then form has to be empty. If everything's empty, form is empty too. And that which is empty has form. So what he's saying is what form is empty, but empty has form. Now how I understand this, and as it's been taught to me, is if you see that, everything is empty, form is emptiness. But that which is empty has form because everything comes out of emptiness. Everything emerges from emptiness. When you do certain practices, you are going to find that you say a certain mantra and your mind hits emptiness. It doesn't mean that you understand emptiness, but that this is where this is going to be created in. It's out of emptiness comes these things. So form is empty. If everything's empty of inherent existence, form's got to be too. But in that emptiness, there's form. If emptiness is everything, then form's got to be part of it too. And that can be kind of a start to begin to think or get a feeling for what emptiness is. But Yogaltikivishvara says, we can go a little further with this. If you want to, feel the Heart Sutra, feel what emptiness is, it's the heart of things, that you say the mantra. It's gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhisattva. And that is another one of the few mantras that can actually be translated into something that makes sense. And what Yogaltikivishvara is saying, go beyond, go thoroughly beyond, and establish yourself in enlightenment. And that, you keep going. You go past what this, conventional and relative truth is. Go past it. Have the courage to go past it. And then when you still think you're there, go beyond it even further. And that's when you will establish yourself in enlightenment. So, this is what Yogaltikivishvara is telling us. And chanting chanting that really does, there's something about chanting the Heart Sutra that makes everybody a little bit happier. Chant 108, chant that in the morning 108 times, and I guarantee you might have a much happier day than you might otherwise have. So that's basically what we are going to discuss today about emptiness. We were talking about, what it isn't, We're talking about dependent rising. We're talking about 5 aggregates, and we talked about the Heart Sutra. And one of the things in the class that we discussed was by realization, or just, fundamentals of emptiness. Understanding these fundamentals of emptiness facilitates compassion. You might not, you don't know what this feels to be an emptiness. I certainly don't. But, you realize, if you can remember, that you're empty of inherent existence. And that means that, everybody else down the street is empty of inherent existence too. So if everybody's, their inherited existence, what we think is not true, we're all equal. Everybody sees that you're, okay, I'm empty of inherent existence, this person is empty of inherent existence, we're all equal. The guy on, me, the homeless guy, is just, his relative is just as empty as the President of the United States. Everyone is empty of inherent existence. And why that is such a wonderful thing is that we don't have, better than, less than, aversion, attachment. We understand that we're all there. And if we are following the Mahayana tradition, even if we, the Bodhisattva, that's the ideal. You don't take the vow, you still practice like a Bodhisattva. And that the Mahayana is realizing that everything is empty and to fill it with compassion. You see, if you're empty and you don't have anything, and that person's empty and they don't have anything, you can generate that compassion, what we were talking about, through the paramitas and the 6 paramitas and the 4 immeasurables. But you can, you get that. It's such a Mahayana concept, compassion for all beings. That's, the Bodhisattva thing. But why, again, if you're empty and everybody's equally empty, have compassion. You don't have to worry about, if everybody's the same. It's like, if I give too much compassion, then something's going to happen to me. We can think of all these crazy things. And especially in the West. I don't think that you really realize how, and I think honestly it's worse now than it's ever been, of how deeply, sense of self is crystallized. That false sense of self. It's about me. It's about my life. It's about what's best for me, and I'm going to take it. We see a great deal of greed. We talked in the last class about, the collective karma of this country. And, honestly, I'll say it again. We're in much better shape than I thought we deserved to be in. So that's the realization of emptiness, how it facilitates compassion. Okay. So we're going to talk about, in my mind, one of the most important, powerful meditations that people can do. And anybody can do this. This does not require, big training. This isn't like, this is actually doing something. This is as close to what I like to think outside of Tantra as a visualization. It's one of the few visualizations that you can do in Buddhism. And it is predominantly a Tibetan practice. But from what I understand, more and more Mahayana traditions are doing Tonglen meditation. And it's very simple to do. Start by calming the mind. We sit in a position and we calm, the mind. And as we give the direction for insight, or not insight, but single focus meditation, and that you just concentrate on the breath. This is what you do too. But after you get your breath in sync, you do something a little different. You visualize that you're breathing in all of the suffering of all sentient beings. And then you're breathing out compassion to all. In breath, you're feeling all of the suffering of all beings. Out, compassion to all beings. Now that's the general instruction. But what can make Tonglen meditation extremely powerful and very, very helpful, and it goes into the whole idea of Mahayana again, but let's say you have a certain issue. Let's say that you suffer from depression, and you're doing this meditation, instead of just visualize the suffering of all beings, you just see, or you visualize, or you understand that you're breathing in all those who suffer from depression, their depression. Then you can say, well, that'll make me even more depressed. Trust me, it doesn't. I'm somebody that's had issues with depression, and this is one thing that I found to be amazingly effective. You breathe in everybody else's depression, and you breathe out compassion, and love and compassion and healing. Some people I like to do, I've suggested to some people, is even if it's somebody that's extremely sick, would you breathe in their illness, and you breathe out the mantra of Medicine Buddha. And that can be very effective. You can kind of streamline these to what you're doing, but again, the general instruction is you visualize all beings, all the suffering of all beings, and then you visualize out the love and compassion. And then you can do, for depression, let's say, look at what you're going through. You can have emotional turmoil. I know somebody that was devastated about somebody's infidelity, and they left. And what she did, she said it literally worked. She was so devastated. But, there's something when you are doing this practice, you're breathing in everybody else. So then we go back to that inherent empty existence. This is something that is obscuring. It's not really there. It's, it's relative. It's not ultimate truth, but it is there. So you're breathing that in, and it's a great way to do compassion. Now, I've had some people say, well, I'm afraid to do it because I'm afraid that, if I breathe somebody else's depression, I'm going to get more depressed. And that's your ego talking. When you have the compassionate heart, you don't have to worry about any of these things. When you have the compassionate heart, and the compassion is a great deal of what Mahayana is all about, because they talk about all sentient beings. The self is important, but it's no more important than anyone else. And honestly, think about it. If we all behave that way, I don't think we have any problems in the world. But, by doing this practice, this Tonglen meditation, you are, really getting a good sense of the 6 paramitas, which we talked about, and I think you could call the 4 immeasurables too, and it really helps generate bodhicitta. As a matter of fact, in the Ngro, our next class is going to be about Vajrayana, and it might take 1 or 2 classes to cover. But you do what's called you do a thing called Ngro, and that's that you look at, the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, and then you do four foundation practices, which is prostrations, Guru Yoga, Vajrayana practice, and mandalas. And then Tonglen meditation is part of the instruction with that too. And I'm pretty sure that all traditions, all 4 Tibetan schools, talk about doing Tonglen meditation to generate the bodhicitta, and when you're doing for a foundation practice. And now I have to get to we're done. And I need to bring out to you, we really hope to keep all the classes and the programs by donation only. I really, really hope that's something we can do. And you can make a big difference in the lives of the entire community. We're not talking just about the LGBT community. We're talking about Dharma community. We're talking about all people with homeless issues, all people that have substance abuse issues, and all people that need, to get educated or some sort of job training. And your contributions are laying the foundation so we can get our social programs, up and running and help get some people off the streets. And the thing about it is that, it's not the size of your contribution. If you want to, if you can afford to, you contribute for what you feel, you're investing in your being. And it doesn't matter the size, but we appreciate any donations, and they can be made at this address, nalndalgbt.org, contribute. And you can also just cut off contribute, and if you want to find out more about what our programs are all about, just go to that web page right there, and that's where we've got. Some people said they'd want to send a check. You can send it to 535 South Curson Avenue, 2D, Los Angeles, California, 90036. And I will, want to stress again, all donations are tax deductible. You get the highest deduction from your taxes you could possibly get, and they are truly greatly appreciated. I hope that some of you, maybe, I think a few of you are going to, listen to this again after you heard the webinar. This is a much more concise, and I feel thorough. I'm comfortable of how this class was going. Sometimes I get a little, I don't know if it's resonating. And that's the thing about when you don't have necessarily an audience, you don't know if you're resonating with everyone. And finally, if you have any questions, comments, put them on the Facebook page. It's Linda LGBT Buddhist. You know what it is. Most of you all came from the web page. The Facebook page, I'm sorry. Put it on the Facebook page. And or you can send an email at Scott. This is the best email address to get a hold of me. Scott at Scottschule, SCOTTSCHUELE.com. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, I hope you got just something out of it. I would be very, very happy. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.